Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the third Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1929 and 1930. George Hill came out with a prison drama that became a box office hit and critical success called The Big House. The film went on to earn 4 Oscar nominations, winning the first ever award for sound, as well as the Writing Award. But it was All Quiet on the Western Front that won Best Picture in the end. So why did The Big House come up short? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to The Big House. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, and we have reached the third Academy Awards. Cannot believe I'm all the way back to the third Academy Awards, which honored the films of 1929 and 1930. And today we are talking about a movie called The Big House, which hopefully either you have seen or that you may seek out after this, because I think we will find that it is quite influential on its genre of film. That is the film that I am saying was the runner-up to a big movie called All Quiet on the Western Front that I'm sure most people who have seen anything from this Best Picture lineup have seen this at least. So my guest today you have heard so many times on this show. You first heard her talking with me about Little Miss Sunshine in the films of 2006, The Piano in the films of 1993, Star Wars in the films of 1977, and then 3 episodes of On Second Thought about The Big Short, Capote, and The Shawshank Redemption, plus a recent episode of For My Consideration on Jerry Maguire. She is part of Citizen Dame, The Watch and Talk, and We Live Entertainment. Welcome back, Karen Peterson.
Hi, Kevin. How are
Hi.
you?
I'm great. I am just feeling so many emotions, as I was telling you before we started recording, about being here at this place of the of this long series that I've embarked on. I can't believe it's almost over.
It's crazy. You've done so much good in the last couple of years, and honestly, with all the amazing guests you've had on over the years, I'm really honored to get to be part of one of your last episodes. So thank you.
Well, I wanted to have on some of the people who have kind of been part of the show from the beginning. You were all the way back in Little Miss Sunshine 2006, which was like summer of 2018 that I was recording this, so
Feels like a million years ago.
it really does. We've talked about a lot of different movies over the years, and I'm excited to dive into classic film with you for the first time. So thanks for being
Yeah,
here. Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, so let's just jump right into The Big House. It is a prison drama about a man named Kent who is convicted of manslaughter, and he's sent to a prison that is quite overcrowded, and he meets the 2 big leaders among the inmates, Butch and Morgan. And Butch is kind of a brutish type, as you can tell by the name. And Morgan is a bit more friendly and manageable and kind of smarter. And at one point, Morgan is going to be paroled, but Kent plants a knife in Morgan's bed as he hopes to cooperate with the warden and those in charge so that he can maybe get a shorter sentence. And so Morgan is sent to solitary confinement, and he's furious at Kent. And eventually there's a prison jailbreak, and the inmates take over the prison, and just chaos ensues. So the film was directed by George Hill and written by Francis Marion. It stars Robert Montgomery as Kent, Wallace Beery as Butch, and Chester Morris as Morgan, alongside Lewis Stone and Layla Hyams. So The Big House was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, winning 2, but not Best Picture. Okay, Karen, well, we have talked about The Shawshank Redemption before, as you know. And on that episode, I believe the big house was brought up. So here you are talking about another prison drama with me.
Look at that.
So, yes, you're my prison drama correspondent, I suppose. Um, so, what are your thoughts on this very formative film?
I love The Big House. I first saw it just a couple of months ago. Um, I had seen some clips of it a few years back, but I'd never gotten to actually sit down and watch the whole film. And then on the Criterion channel, they had a collection of films written by Frances Marion, who did win an Oscar for this and won again the next year for The Champ. So she was the first person, not only the first woman, but the first person to win 2 Academy Awards. And so I love Frances Marion. And it's kind of become a thing for me. I want to see everything she ever worked on. But this is a really, to me, this is a really special film because we talk so much today in 2021. Oh, it feels so good to say that. But we talk about how much we need to reform our criminal justice system and our prison systems and all the inequities and the problems that are happening there. And if you go back to this film, which came out in 1930, it it has some of the exact same arguments that we're still having today, almost 100 years later. And I found that so fascinating to watch this, 90 years after it was
Yeah.
first released. And that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and hearing the problems with the overcrowding, hearing about the poor conditions. There's a line that the prison warden says at one point. He says they want to put men in prison, but they don't want to provide for them once they're in. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, man, we're still dealing with that now. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it really just touches on some themes that are really universal, sadly.
Yeah.
And I think it does so in such a brilliant way. And I think that it really does a good job of, and this is credit to the writing, credit to the directing, and credit to these great actors who are able to just really make you sympathize with these men. Even Butch, who's going around bragging about all these women that he's beaten and people that he's killed. And even him, you feel some degree of sympathy for him and for the situation that he's in. And for me, I couldn't help wondering, like, what was Butch's life like outside? What circumstances turned him into this person, you know? And I think that it's just so well done because of that. And I'm so glad that they made this movie pre-code because I think there are certain things that could not have been done in the era of censorship and including, when the prison riot breaks out and it gets really violent and kind of scary. And it really does make you feel the desperation of these men. So I think The Big House is a really, really fantastic film.
Yeah, so I have to say, just looking at the field of Oscar nominees that I watched from this year, this is certainly one of the more advanced and certainly modern feeling of the bunch. You can absolutely see its influence on not just movies about prison, but also TV. You have a lot of like the stock types, like the audience surrogate and the big tough guy leader, the one who's more behind the scenes and scheming. And then there's the older guy, of course, and also just like a really brutal administration with the warden and the prison guards that really does have us more on the side of the prisoners and seeing things from their perspective. And I guess I had always kind of taken that for granted, the idea of presenting stories about prisoners through the lens that is sympathetic to them, these people who have been put away, some of them for very violent crimes, and we are being asked to root for them or at least hope that they are not treated as poorly as they are. And I think just on that basic level, a movie like this deserves a lot of credit, and I definitely want to highlight Frances Marion's writing here for helping to originate that on film, and especially to ask an audience in 1930 who maybe had more of a limited understanding of the conditions in the prison system than we might now, to just sympathize with that. And I think that is worth noting, you know, even before we delve into the plot aspects of this.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, obviously without social media and without, video footage and things like that, really people only had experience with the prison system if they had people that were in the prison system.
Yeah.
And even today, we don't really think about when someone gets sent off to prison, we don't really think about what their life is going to be like there. And even with all the knowledge that we have about what goes on. And I know it's not uncommon, even when we do think about what people's experiences are going to be. We don't tend, and I say we collectively, I hope that I don't have this attitude, but, we kind of don't care sometimes. It's like, well, serves them right. They shouldn't have done it,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. And I think that that's sort of the attitude that the warden is expressing, not that he feels it personally, because one of the things that I really appreciate about this warden compared to others like the one in Shawshank Redemption
Mm-hmm.
is that he really seems to actually care about the conditions of the prisoners. He seems to care about and believe in the ability of at least some of them to be rehabilitated. And yet he's still, when it comes down to it and he has to make tough decisions, and his responsibility is to stop this riot and take care of his people. He does that, but it's from a sense of duty more than from like the audience, or not the audience, but people on the outside who are cheering on, like, yeah, more prisons, more prisons. I don't care how harsh the conditions are. I don't know, it's just a different perspective. And I think I'm really surprised how uh, by how sympathetic the warden is too, because that's not a view you normally get to see. And even some of the guards, they're not. I mean, they definitely have their prisoners they get along with better, and some they don't care about. But I don't know. It's different than this feeling of like, oh, all these people running the prison are all evil and terrible, and they're causing the problems. It's different from that, and I think that nuanced perspective is really refreshing, and it makes this even a richer story.
Yeah, totally. And I was doing some reading on the background of how Frances Marion captured just the environment of prison so well before she wrote this script. And she went to the San Quentin prison in California, and she really studied all of the details of just the interactions and the jargon and just like the way things were conducted, and also just all the little nooks and crannies of like the sounds that you would hear. And I think that's all really well captured here as well, especially in those little moments where it's like they're racing cockroaches or they're telling stories, you know, doing whatever they need to do to pass the time. I think you can really tell that she put in the work to make it all feel authentic and portray everyone as somewhat complex human beings, even Butch. And that to me is just all the more impressive to me, considering the time period where Hollywood was just figuring out how to use sound and how to make stories that are more complex.
Yeah, definitely. And to give us such rounded characters, even from, like you say, even from someone like Butch, who very easily could just be sort of this one note, oh, he's just this big dumb guy who's just really violent, but he has this softer side, and you get that really sweet scene when he gets the letter and he tells everyone, oh, it's from this girl, and he's telling him what she says, but it turns out he can't read. And then you find out about his mother, and it's heartbreaking. And I think that is the kind of thing that makes this such a fantastic film, is those touches that don't have to be there but that are. And I think about a movie like The Shawshank Redemption, which I think is probably, out of all the films I've seen, that's probably the closest comparison, because I haven't
Yeah.
seen too many films that are just about life behind bars. But it's like, even in that, you get to know who these men are inside, but really, other than like when a couple of them are talking about bouncing from one sentence to another in different prisons, you don't really get much of their life outside at all. You don't really know the details of any of their crimes. You don't know what their lives are like, who their families are. And so getting just a little bit of a glimpse into a couple of these men in the big house is just, it makes it that much more special.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also want to just talk about the decision to not have Kent be some like innocent little lamb who's just thrust into this harsh environment and just, you
Mhm.
know, having us fully on his side the whole time as the protagonist. Because, I mean, let's just say it. I mean, he essentially ends up being the villain here. You know, Kent
Yeah.
is the one that leads to Morgan not being paroled, and he's the one who is informing to the administration all the time. He tips them off about the planned jailbreak. Just everything he's doing is completely in his own self-interest, and there's something really fascinating about how he's introduced as, you know, having killed someone in a drunk driving accident. He doesn't really seem like the criminal type, so he doesn't really
Mhm.
blend in well with this group, and nor does he even want to, it doesn't seem like. And I think that sets up why he's just so willing to sell everyone out just to protect himself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because he's in for basically accidentally killing someone.
Right.
But then and he's put into a cell with Butch, who knows what he really did, but it was
Right.
probably bad. And
Yeah.
then Morgan, John Morgan, who's in for like, wasn't it forgery?
Yeah.
It's like the room assignments in in this prison are odd.
Very
But
randomized, yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess that's what happens when you have 3,000 men in a prison that holds 1,800. So,
Exactly. Yes. And I just think, again, as a screenwriting choice, it's almost like what we would see in a show like Orange is the New Black. And like Piper isn't exactly the villain there, but she's the one who we are following along with in the beginning. But it turns out that there are much more interesting stories happening within the prison, and she kind of ends up being less fun to watch compared to the other characters who are just more honest about who they are, and they have struggles that are more sympathetic. And I think that's going on here as well, when this turns out to really be the story of Morgan, which I thought was a really interesting reversal in a way.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting though, and I think that it's good that they, because obviously everything that happens with Morgan from the time Marlowe shows up or Kent shows up, um everything that happens to him is because of Kent, but and his desire to get revenge and everything. But I think that it was an interesting opening, and I like the fact that it shows the whole intake process and everything that happens from the moment Kent gets there and he's getting fingerprinted and processed, has to strip and be showered off, gets his clothes, has to go into the cell. And it's funny because it's like, wow, Shawshank Redemption really did homage this movie more than I had realized. But yeah, it really does just like it feels like you're being introduced into this prison yourself. And I think maybe that's part of why it's so easy to quickly start to care about the prisoners, is because you've kind of gone through the process that they have all gone through as well.
Kind of a cliche trick for a reason, because
Mm-hmm.
it just kind of works. And this is
Yeah.
an early example of that. But let's dive more into these performances. I think it's very understandable that of the three main characters here, that Wallace Beery is the one who gets the Oscar nomination. You know, it's such a big, broad, sort of larger than life character who also has this kind of quirky personality trait of being quite menacing and brutish, but then it's like when things aren't really going his way, he just kind of softens and he's just like, oh, well, I'm just messing around. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
kidding, you know? I think he makes that work really well, just the unpredictability of that. And I can see why the Academy would be impressed with just how much energy he brought to not just this role, but many roles, and he would win a few years later for the champ. Maybe it's not the more complex character compared to what like Chester Morris is being asked to do, but I think he offers a very strong energy in a film that is mostly filled with characters who are sort of beaten down and depressed on the whole. So I love what he brings to this, even though it's like, like I said, it's just the more obvious performance of the three. I think he still fits the role
He really
perfectly.
does. He's so much fun to watch. And I think that it's, like you say, it's easy to single him out because you've got Robert Montgomery, who is kind of stoic throughout the movie until he has his big breakdown at the end when he realizes he's about to die. um, and but he's very somber through the whole thing. And then you've got Chester Morris, who has some really great moments, but also, and I'm not taking anything away from his performance because he's really, really good, but it's more even keeled, I think, and more even toned through much of it. He does have moments where he gets angry, understandably. He has moments where he gets really, upset and sad, but there's not a lot of ups and downs, highs and lows. Whereas Wallace Beery, he goes from being like hilarious and holding court with all these guys and just, riveting them. And then he has this really sweet, tender, sad moment when he's finding out that his mother has just died and he couldn't be there because he's in prison. And then another moment where he's just going to go beat up the next guy who crosses him. And so, yeah, it's a bigger performance, and it's, I don't know, it's funny because it's like, I don't know that he's the one that I would have personally singled out of them, but it also makes perfect sense why they would.
Right. And I do just want to give him credit as a performer because I do think with characters like the ones he would play, and I watched him, with the champ and with Min and Bill recently, where he really had a type that he played often, just this very classic, like, character actor, big, bold, that sort of thing. But I think there's more to his performance here, especially like you said, in those more vulnerable moments that, it's more than just surface level big brash moments, I guess
Yeah.
I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, and it makes you realize that there's so many actors. I mean, there's a lot that just are pretty faces, and so they keep, or they have a certain look, and so they keep getting roles. But it just makes you think there's probably so many of these character actors that never get moments to really show what they can do. And it's great that he has this role where he does have those opportunities to be a little bit more tenderhearted and emotional.
And I don't have a whole lot to say about Robert Montgomery. I think he's decent, and he portrays like that fear well, especially at the end, as you mentioned, but also in the beginning when he's very just out of his element. And he's not exactly like the brightest bulb. Like, I don't know if he fully
Hmm.
realizes just what he's doing in there. He's just kind of flying by the seat of his pants and desperate to survive. But I also think that the middle section really shortchanges his arc, to me at least, where Chester Morris really takes over with his storyline. Not that I necessarily missed him, because, like I said, he's not really the best of this ensemble, but it honestly made me care less about that character, so that by the end I was like, I don't really care which way this is going to end up for him, but I sort of just wish he does get his demise.
Yeah, it's an interesting I mean, you mentioned this before, but it's interesting how he's the first one that we meet. He's the one that we think we're
Right.
following, and then it very quickly turns into someone else's story altogether. And I think that it it would have been interesting if there had been a little bit more time, if it had been, even if it had been like all three of them really getting um major arcs that lasted through the whole film. That could have been interesting, but I also think that relegating him to the back for a bit, I don't know, I feel like it drove the story more because you start to care about the sister when Morgan gets out. You care about Kent's sister, partly because you care about Kent, but also because it's this poor woman who just she has no idea what's coming to her or why. And yeah, so it's I don't know, it's interesting, but I think that when it does change and become Morgan's story, I think that's what really kicks it into gear and really sets up a third act that feels bigger than it otherwise
Right.
would have.
Yeah, I agree. And with Chester Morris, who does end up surprisingly being the true protagonist, I have to say that I am a bit surprised he didn't get an Oscar nomination for this, especially because he received one just the previous year for Alibi, so he was already kind of in the club. Maybe he doesn't have the big, bold acting moments of Wallace Beery, but I did find him to be quite charismatic and not necessarily in the typical leading man just kind of coasting off his good looks kind of way, but
Mm-hmm.
something just more thoughtful, I guess, and introspective, which is something that's, required for this particular role, because you have to believe that eventually when he makes his big jailbreak and gets out into the real world, that he would be able to get along with people and people would like him.
The thing about him too is just leading up to his jailbreak. You have to be sympathetic to that and want to root for him while he's on the outside, because and that's set up really well because he's about to be paroled the next day, and he gets set up by Kent and thrown into the they call it the dungeon. So gets put in solitary for a month, and he knows he's going to get his sentence extended, and he was about to get out. And so it's like watching that, knowing what happened to him, you're on his side when he wants revenge. It's like, yeah, go,
Totally.
yeah, get out, go get that guy.
Yeah, and when he does get out, I don't know how you feel about this whole section because it is quite different from the rest of the film where he's on the outside. I think it's a bit rushed on the whole, but still very compelling with how he's interacting with Anne, who is the sister of Kent, and getting her to change her mind on calling the police. You have to really believe that she would do that for him. I don't know if I've really bought the sudden change for her, but he does have an easy charm to him that they do kind of make that feel somewhat right.
Yeah, this is one thing that I would like to have seen done a little bit differently, in that I think it would have been good to have some um, swap back and forth between him on the outside and going back a little bit to Kent and showing life continuing in the prison and sort of what's going on. And because that's the thing, like, if because didn't sorry, I'm trying to think, like, didn't Morgan tell Butch that Kent was the one that set him up when they were both down in the dungeon?
I think that's
Or did
kind
he
of
say
like
he
an
didn't know?
yeah, I
He said
thought
he
that
didn't
was like
know.
the ending revelation is that
That's right. That's right. So
yeah,
so he originally tells Butch he doesn't know who did it, just that
right.
he got set up. So it would have been interesting to go back and forth with the prison and show kind of what was going on, and is Kent being harassed? Have people kind of left him alone now that Morgan's gone? Like, what's happening with him? And if you had gone between the two stories, then it would have at least given the impression that time has passed, that maybe it's been at least a
Yeah.
couple of weeks, so that it does feel more reasonable that Anne would have fallen for this guy,
Hmm.
um and would have that definite, like, I don't want to send him back to prison.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think there is a lot of interesting story kind of missing there of just the ramifications of what happened when Morgan was away and
Hmm.
just like how that recalibrated the prison maybe. So,
Yeah. Well, yeah, because then when he does come back, and we can talk about that in a second, but then when he does come back, it's like he pops in the middle of like a huge breakout plan. And it would have been interesting to see some of that, like, what were, besides like the food being terrible and there being three guys to a cell, like what was kind of the final straw that made them decide we need to bust out of here, and we think that this will actually be a good idea.
And also, I feel like we missed a little bit of like how Kent was feeling about how Morgan just broke out after all this.
Hmm.
Like, what is he going through? Is he like paranoid that somehow he's gonna come back and do something to him? I mean, who knows? But
Hmm.
yeah, let's talk about the third act of this, where Morgan is back and he wants to be more on the straight and narrow, but Butch wants to just continue doing things the way they've been doing, and he's planning this jailbreak, and that just completely involves overthrowing the whole prison, just the warden and the guards, and that whole sequence is so chaotic and unpredictable, and certainly lots of standout sound work here as well. And this is where we see Morgan really acting in the moment and figuring out what to do, where Butch has just gone into full like vengeance mode, just, you know, killing people, and Morgan decides to actually protect some of the guards and Kent, even though he very well could have just sought revenge himself after what happened earlier. What did you make of this whole sequence here?
Oh man, I love how chaotic it is. It's so well choreographed. It's really cool that, and it makes me wonder, like, how much rehearsal did they have to do to get this right with the cameras, with the timing of the sound, and I mean they're using practical effects, so they had to have all
Mm-hmm.
of that down, and it just comes across so well because to have that kind of mess and chaos play out so perfectly, you have to know what you're doing, and you have to have really great craftspeople behind the scenes making that work. And so I think it's really incredibly well done, and I think that continuing to drive this emotional story on top of that is just incredible too, from the part of the actors and also with the writing. And I think that it really is, watching what happens with Morgan, and it's like, man, if he just had gotten caught just out anywhere and brought back and hadn't had this whole thing and met Marlowe's sister, who knows what would have happened to Kent when he when Morgan came back. But I think that having that connection with the sister and knowing like, oh, he had this life outside, it kind of, it gives Morgan sort of even more empathy toward this guy who completely wronged him and who tried to ruin his life.
And I feel like that what you just talked about is not even like that spelled out to the audience.
Hmm.
Also, you know, like that's kind of implied after what he's been through with his sister.
Yeah,
That I think that's another example of great showy writing and not telly writing. So,
exactly, exactly.
um, yeah, but ultimately Kent does actually end up getting shot and killed, and it's interesting because I don't think it's some big theatrical moment where the score is swelling or anything. It's just very frank and almost cold, which I found to be quite affecting, and just
Yeah.
such like it's such a bleak ending for that character that for some reason, like after it was over, I just couldn't shake the feeling of how just quick and cold that was.
Yeah, and it's such a senseless act because
Right.
he, first of all, he caused himself to be in prison in the first place, but it was through something that he didn't intend.
Mm-hmm.
He was out drunk driving and killed someone, and that's terrible, and he definitely deserves to be punished for that. Um but he didn't, it's not like he went out intending to try to kill someone, and suddenly he finds himself, because of mistakes he's made, in this unthinkable situation and in this place that has horrible conditions. And so by the end, it's like, because I think because of the fact that Morgan forgives him, you get that sense that Morgan has forgiven him. Um, that it does make his death a little bit sadder too, because it's like he's not just this like this terrible person. It's like, no, you understand, even if you don't agree, you understand why he did what he did and why he made the choices that he made. And so it does feel sad. And I think part of what heightens that too is the fact that we've gotten to meet his sister and gotten to know her, and we know how crushed she's gonna be when she finds out about this. And but it's again, it's like, man, this wouldn't have happened if if Kent had just shut up and not tried to curry favor with the guard. So it's like, oh, it's such a complicated mix of things that happen right there. And I love that. I love that there's not a clear, this is good, this is bad. It's just a whole lot of like, I don't know what I would have done in that situation either. So,
Right.
yeah.
It's a very complicated situation, which, I mean, I don't want to keep going back to the same talking point of like, that's very impressive for 1930, but I really do find it impressive that we can have this conversation about all these different characters with motivations that are very understandable, and it's not this white hat black hat situation 90 years later.
Right. Well, and
It's
this is part of why this film couldn't have been made this way even 10 years after it was, because during the
with the code,
production code,
right?
yeah, you couldn't have people like, you couldn't be sympathizing with some of these prisoners, especially the ones that have killed people. And
Right.
and so it really does make this a much deeper experience and a much more visceral experience because of that ability to see their side. Again, even if you don't agree with them, and even if you think that you would have made a different choice, you can see where they're coming from. And that really just makes this really fantastic cinema.
And then we have Butch ending up meeting his demise as well, which I definitely anticipated, but is still a very effective moment between the two of them that is quite emotional in the middle of that chaos to see them both just reconciling,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. And to get to have that moment where Butch learns the truth, and even at that point when it doesn't even matter anymore, like, it's still good that he gets to go out knowing that his friend didn't betray him.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see how Morgan is pardoned and he has his big reuniting moment with Anne. I mean, there's so much there's so much in this third act that I think is very, very effective, and I'm just very impressed. I knew that this film had a good reputation before I watched it, but I was really just struck by just the amount of emotion that I felt towards the end here, and how it felt like all of these characters were so well developed and they had these fascinating relationships between them that, compared to other movies that I watched, like I said, it's like it they all pale in comparison to what is accomplished here. So,
Yeah, it starts off in just kind of this, like, this interesting kind of, not slow but very methodical introduction, and then it ends up with this big huge climax that then resolves in not a methodical way so much, but just, I don't know, it just resolves on this emotional note that is unexpected, considering that it's like a prison drama. You're not
right.
expecting this bittersweet conclusion.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of this one. I'm so glad that I chose this as a runner up. Do you have any other stray observations you want to make about The Big House before we move on to the Oscars?
Let me see. I wrote some notes. I'm just gonna look back through them really quickly. I think I've said pretty much everything I wanted to say about it. If you haven't watched it by
Okay.
now, please do. Oh, yeah, just like, again, yeah, we're spoiling the whole movie, but just going back to what you were talking about with the sounds and the rhythms of the prison and all this kind of, these senses of like the mundane nature of just life in prison. I think it's really interesting how one of the early shots is the boots marching, and you hear that rhythmic marching of these men just kind of being marched around the prison. And when it ends, it's Morgan's walking out a free man, but you can hear the boots marching behind him as the gates close. And it's just kind of that, yeah, he's going to go out and live his life, but all these men are still here and still continuing in that just nothing
Right.
mundane existence. It's a really interesting juxtaposition, and I think that it's really, really well done to give you that sense that life continues for them exactly as it has been.
Yeah. I also wanted to highlight another scene that is good in that regard, of the shot of the solitary confinement area,
Yeah. Mhm.
and we can only hear the voices of the people that are in all of these different little solitary confinement rooms, and they're all
Mhm.
just communicating with each other, but we don't actually see any of the characters. We're not like cutting back and forth between Butch and Morgan. It's just this kind of static shot,
Yeah.
and there was something very evocative about that.
It really does. That and all these other touches just really do make the audience feel like they're part of the story. And
Yeah.
it's really incredible that, yeah, in such an early film that they had that sort of thought in mind as they were making this. And I think that we shouldn't be surprised, because early film was all about like, oh, what can we show audiences, what can we, what can we give them to watch. And yet I think we've kind of assigned, again, collective we've kind of assigned sort of this limited perspective to early filmmakers that they did not have. And I think this really proves that they had a much more audience thinking process going on.
Yeah, and that's another scene that feels like you feel the mundane nature of being in prison, of just everything has slowed down. It's not like we're doing these fast cuts back and forth. It's just like you're stuck on that one shot. So, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't be too like surprised that filmmakers knew what they were doing back then,
Yeah.
especially because, we were just coming off the silent era where everything had to be expressed through just visual storytelling. And I'm just personally struck by the fact that, again, this is one of the early sound films that really kind of are able to master how to tell a story like this in an era where there was a lot of people who were making mistakes about
Mhm.
how to tell stories like this. So, all right. So when we come back, we will be discussing the Oscars of 1929/1930 and where the Big House fit in the middle of everything and how it was the runner-up to All Quiet on the Western Front. Have you ever wanted to share a bit of the spotlight with Meryl Streep? Or play a game where Daniel Kaluuya is on your team? Sounds interesting. Well, this year you can, thanks to today's sponsor, the Star Draft. As you guys already know, award season is finally almost here, and Star Draft lets you be a part of it like never before. It's kind of like fantasy football meets the Golden Globes. Here's how it works. Head to thestardraft.com to create a league to invite friends, or join a public league to make new ones. Draft a team of 10 actors and musicians. Think Olivia Colman is going to sweep every award show this winter? Well, that certainly wouldn't be triggering for me at all, but you can draft her. Before every nomination and award show, set a lineup. Every time your actor or musician earns an accolade, they earn your team points. Then sit back, relax, watch the awards, and rehearse your acceptance speech like Kate Winslet talking into her shampoo bottle. The site's top scoring team at the end of Oscar night earns a cash prize. It's 100% free, and because I love the Star Draft and you all so much, I've created a public league that you can join right now. All you have to do is sign up and join the And the Runner-Up Is League at thestardraft.com. That's www.thestardraft.com. As always, I look forward to beating you all award season long. And we're back. So now we will be discussing why The Big Short, not The Big Short, The Big House. Whoops! That's
Slightly
another
different
movie we
movie.
talked about, Karen. Yes. But why The Big House was the runner-up to All Quiet on the Western Front. The Big House was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Actor for Wallace Beery, Best Writing, and Best Sound Recording. And it won for Best Writing and Best Sound Recording, which was the very first instance of Best Sound Recording being a category at the Oscars. So, history made there. And again, we can't really talk to any sort of precursors, so there's not a huge sense of what the race was shaping up to be. But, Karen, why do we think All Quiet on the Western Front was ultimately our winner, and why The Big House couldn't quite get there?
It's funny because I feel like we've had a very similar conversation on other episodes I've been on. And I feel like All Quiet on the Western Front is a film that just wasn't going to be beat. And I think there are a few reasons
Right.
for that. Although I will say it's interesting not only that The Big House won for sound recording over All Quiet on the Western Front, but that All Quiet was not nominated.
Yeah, I don't understand how that happened.
Yeah, it's weird. It's very weird
Yeah.
because it's this big war movie with these big war scenes and really just incredible sound also, and
Mm-hmm.
somehow did not get nominated. I'm not sure. I don't get that, but yeah, All Quiet on the Western Front is such an such an interesting film, and it's one that has also been homaged a lot, most recently last year in 1917. And it's it's an interesting era that it came out because it was released in 1930. It's about the First World War, and it's several years before anything was going on in Germany, let alone a Second World War. And yet it really it's I don't know, it's interesting because it gives you this German soldier perspective. It really wants to put you in the mindset of these kids that were conscripted into fighting, that were basically told this is the right thing, this is the honorable thing, and go fight for your country. And for us, they were fighting for the wrong side. And I think it's fascinating that there's this movie that's a war movie that, if you look at that era, most war movies were very like, go America, go Britain. And this is very much showing the flip side of war and the consequences of war and what it really does to soldiers. And it probably wouldn't have gone over as well to show the horrors and the costs of war if it had been an American or a British soldier. I think showing it from the side of like a um what's the word, a disenchanted German soldier is why audiences were able to latch onto it. But yeah, it's a heartbreaking film, and it's a beautiful film, and it was not, nothing was going to beat it for Best Picture. I really don't think.
Yeah, I was definitely going to come in saying pretty much the same thing as far as there was probably no suspense going into this race that this was going to win. This was a big, like $1 million production, which was huge at the time. And just everything that I've read from Inside Oscar and other sort of texts from that era is that it was always just going to be this movie because of how much of a hit it was and how critically it was so acclaimed, and it made a point. And this is the first big dramatic film to win Best Picture that's not silent. And I suppose in a way you could say that a movie like this is the origin of what people think of as Best Picture, with just the big epic scale, the important subject matter, having some type of social message. It's kind of an ensemble piece based on a book, even. All the elements are there, and it's such a massive production compared to all the other nominees that there's really nothing that came close, probably. And it had a lot of people talking. The ending and the message of the film itself it can be quite bleak, but also very impactful. And I think it does just get people talking, which is what great art should do. And I think the cinematography is also really well thought out, very well choreographed. And there's so many subjective shots where someone is like looking above from a trench and seeing men just leaping over the trenches, or these scenes where there's just so much going on, but you never lose the perspective of seeing it through these men's eyes. And I think it's just another one of these carefully thought out films like The Big House. And Lou Ayres was absolutely robbed of a nomination. I don't know what happened there,
Yeah.
especially for his moments towards the end of the film where he's just totally disillusioned from the war and he's just like ranting at that school. And then, all the scenes where he's showing some tenderness, like at the end with the butterfly and all that. I think it's a really outstanding performance. And I get that he was basically like a new performer at the time. This was one of his first films, but that's really the only reason I can think of for why he was overlooked in Best Actor. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like you were saying, this doesn't have a big horse race element to it, but I will just say that for The Big House and why I chose it as a runner up, I think it's something that will perhaps be implied when we talk about the other Best Picture nominees, but there's just a lot more heft to The Big House compared to the rest of these, which are somewhat lightweight in comparison.
Yeah.
And it's another one that does have a big social message and was a box office hit, and also probably appealed more to men in the Academy, compared to something like The Divorcee or The Love Parade.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Well, and it's this really epic war movie. I don't know, the All Quiet on the Western Front. Like I said, it's it has influenced so many films over the years. Big House has too, but in a different way. And this is just kind of this sort of set the tone for how we make war movies and how we tell those stories. And it's interesting that it's from the German perspective, but I think just looking at the way that it opens on these boys in this school being sort of, cheer led, like, oh, this is what you want to do. This is a great thing. And it's like, it's easy to get caught up in that. And you see how all these boys, like, yeah, of course I want to serve. Why wouldn't I? I don't want to be the one kid that says I'm not going to go. And then it
right.
ends very quietly, no score, just
I
this
know.
really
Yeah.
heartbreaking moment. And you think about everything that you've seen in between those two scenes, and it's just it leaves an impact, especially with the way that it ends so quietly, which I mean that's in the title of the movie, um but it really does just like I love at least the version that I rewatched this week. I don't know if it was shown this way theatrically. Probably it was, but when you see the hand, you see him reaching for the butterfly, you see the gunshot, or you hear the gunshot, you don't actually see him die, but you know that that's what's happened. And then it goes to the soldiers that have been lost marching, and they look back, and it's sort of this ghostly look, and then it goes black for several seconds before it goes to the end, and it's just quiet, and it just gives you this moment to just pause and really think about the cost of war and what it does to us as people. And I don't know how anybody could walk away from that and not feel something like really powerful in that ending.
Yeah. It's this moment of silence that you're right. It's just the inclusion of that, I think, just tips it over the edge of really making you sit back and think about what you've just seen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I said, I mean, this isn't really much of a contest, but I do think it is worth noting that The Big House does end up winning for writing for Francis Marion over All Quiet on the Western Front.
Mm-hmm.
It's always notable to me whenever a film beats a Best Picture winner in a writing category. I mean, that's certainly more noteworthy nowadays, where we see picture and screenplay so tied together often.
Yeah.
But I do think it is worth noting that All Quiet on the Western Front, which does have very strong writing of its own, ended up losing to The Big House.
Yeah, well, I don't know for sure, but I feel like I mean, at least looking back until you get to like 1950, there's much more of a sense of share the wealth in the
Yeah,
earlier
that's
Oscar
true.
years. And I love that. And I think we're getting back, or we've been going back to that more and more in the recent years too. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I absolutely think you're correct that The Big House was certainly the runner up in this year. And if All Quiet hadn't been there, perhaps The Big House would have been the Oscar winner. It's hard to say. But yeah, I think that it really is great that they had back in the early days, they had this desire and this need, and or not need, but sort of just this idea of really just allowing the celebration of a lot of films. If All Quiet on the Western Front had just run away with everything, then it would seem like these other films are really just kind of not worth talking about to us 90 years later, even though they are. And so the fact that we're talking about a film from 1930 that was written by a woman that won an Oscar for it, um, is really exciting and noteworthy and important. And it shows that the Academy recognized that back then too.
I agree. And I think it's absolutely the right call. Even
Yeah.
though I think All Quiet on the Western Front is honestly one of the Best Picture winners, I think the amount of attention that Frances Marion put into everything she observed from prison and got it into this screenplay, and also layered on top of everything all the characterization, I think that is more of an impressive writing achievement than All Quiet on the Western Front, which obviously deserved its directing win, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it's a good split.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so let's get to some of these questions. We got quite a few for All Quiet on the Western Front.
I didn't look ahead, so I don't know what's coming.
Oh, good, good. Okay. Getting you spur of the moment. All right. Putting you on the spot, maybe. Who
Yep.
knows? All right. Gabe Guarine said, "Why didn't Lou Ayres get a Best Actor nomination?"
We don't
Yeah,
know.
I agree. Hard to say, but maybe he's just too young, too pretty.
Yeah,
Sometimes
it's
the
funny.
Academy gets a certain feeling about that, you know?
Yeah, the Academy has pretty much always been more willing to nominate the young up and coming actresses and
Oh, yeah.
not actors. It's very weird, and it goes back to the beginning of time.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. It is in the third Academy Awards. We have an example of that. So there you go. In the Best Picture winner. So
Yeah,
if that
exactly.
doesn't show you that like they have some type of bias, that there you go. This is from Joe Gouveia, who also asked why he missed out on a Best Actor nom, but also if the category existed, would Lewis Wilhelm have cakewalked to a Best Supporting Actor win for All Quiet on the Western Front?
I think if the category had existed, that probably Chester Morris would have gotten nominated for actor, and Wallace Beery would have walked to a supporting actor win.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that. But Lewis Wolheim, by the way, playing Cat in All Quiet on the
I mean,
Western
he's
Front.
great. He's
Um,
great. It
yeah,
definitely would have been a contest for sure. I don't know.
yeah,
Maybe neither of them would have cakewalked. One of them would have ended up winning, but I don't know. That's a good one.
yeah. I would say he would get nominated. Other than that, I can't really say because it's very hard to tell who could have been in the supporting races in these early years. Because it was also just kind of random sometimes, you know, just movies and performances that, or like performances that weren't in movies that were getting nominated in other categories. So
Hmm.
you can never tell.
I mean, that even still happens today. So
No, that's true. Yeah, that has also continued 90 years later. And Miss Cat L said, "Who in the All Quiet cast would you have singled out for an acting nomination?" You know, obviously
Hmm.
those two. But
Yes, yeah,
as
both of
far as
them.
anyone else, do we think anyone else? Let me just look over this gigantic cast.
I know I had to pull it up again because I'm like, let me think. I think those two are the ones that I would have singled out personally, but
Yeah, they have the most emotional resonance, I think.
they
So,
do, yeah, and the
yeah.
most developed characters.
This is from Ken Keishin. Did you feel some vibe from All Quiet on the Western Front when you watched 1917? I mean,
Yeah.
yes.
There are some very
I would say so.
direct, yeah, there are some very direct and specific homages in 1917 that come from All Quiet on the Western Front. I think it's pretty clear.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yes. Safe to say that there is some type of vibe we get.
They're both
All
great
right.
movies, by the way.
I agree. I'll be talking about 1917 as my 2019 runner-up in a few weeks. So
Nice.
look forward to that. Yes. All right, let's move on to our other Best Picture nominees from this year. Let's start with Disraeli.
Yeah, let's talk
Okay.
about that movie.
Yes. This movie that I totally watched.
Definitely. Twice.
So, oh, wow. Look at you. Yeah, so this is not available to stream anywhere.
I have
Even
not
like
seen
the special
Disraeli.
sites that I go to sometimes when I'm out of options, like nowhere. Just completely unavailable. Which is a bummer because it's a Best Picture nominee. It's a Best Actor win for George Arliss. I will say from what I've seen from people who have logged it on Letterboxd, which isn't very many, quite a few low reviews. Just a lot of one and two stars from what I've seen.
Yeah,
So
it makes me wonder. I mean, I haven't read any of the reviews anybody's written, but it does make me wonder about that. Is it that they're seeing really degraded versions of it? Because it's especially when, I mean, I don't know. I guess TCM plays it once in a while, so there might be some sort of like a restoration that has happened. But yeah, is that all based on just thematics, or is there something else there too? I don't know.
yeah, I'm sure it hasn't been exactly preserved well,
Right.
even if TCM does have it. But
Yeah.
I don't have much to say, obviously, because I didn't
Nope.
see it. Except I guess I'll just read the IMDb summary. How about that?
Yeah. Tell
It
us what it's about.
says, yes, Prime Minister of Great Britain Benjamin Disraeli outwits the subterfuge of the Russians and chicanery at home in order to secure the purchase of the Suez Canal. Does that sound interesting to you, Karen?
Well, I love the word chicanery, but
Yes. I mean, not only is there chicanery, but there is also subterfuge.
right.
So
I mean, how could you go wrong with that?
that sounds juicy. Yes. I guess we'll just get to some questions about it because we got quite a few, oddly enough. Yeah, okay. This is from Matthew Lucas. He said, "How was Disraeli?" with a little winking emoji. So this is clearly in reference to my tweet from earlier in the week asking, how do I watch this movie? I will say I do not know still because I did not see it.
I did
All
put it
right.
on my watch list, so next time TCM has it, I will get a notification to let me know.
Good. There we go. There we go. Yes. Maybe it'll be on whatever 31 Days of Oscar comes around.
Hopefully.
Whenever that is. Yeah.
Yeah, whenever that is this year. I don't know.
Right. Mark Lamb said, compare Arliss in Disraeli with his other Jewish portrayal in House of Rothschild. Again, can't compare, so don't know.
I have seen neither of those, so
Yeah. His performance in House of Rothschild is, it doesn't hold up well. Let's just put it
Okay.
that way. Yeah. Ronaldo Sosa said, I didn't watch the films for this year, so the only thing I can ask is, was Disraeli worth the trouble of finding it? Again, I don't know if it was worth the trouble because I didn't see it, but I would guess based on the reviews that it's not. But it still is kind of worth the trouble because it's a Best Actor winner and a Best Picture nominee.
Exactly.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Exactly. The Academy needs to do something about this. This is ridiculous.
Well, thank you so much for teeing that up, because my next question comes from Gabe Guarin saying, why doesn't the Academy actually preserve their Oscar nominees for the viewing public?
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know why they don't, because they should.
Yeah. I would imagine some of it has to do with the fact that film preservation used to really suck, and there are a lot of films that have just kind of been lost and not like, oh, we just can't find the canisters, but actually the films themselves have disintegrated. They have just not been kept up. And I know in some cases they have managed to find film in like weird places in the earth that you wouldn't expect like certain movies to exist. But yeah, so I think that's part of the problem, is that some of these just will never be recoverable, and some of them probably are privately owned. And so there's some consideration in trying to get access to them. And also, I think another thing, especially in recent years, is the Academy's been kind of busy. So I'm hoping
Yeah.
once the museum is up and running, that that'll be kind of the next thing that they work on, is finding and restoring this old collection of early Best Picture nominees, and just Oscar nominees in general, and films in general.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I really hope that you're right about that.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm just looking on the Disraeli Wikipedia page, and there's a whole section that says preservation status.
Oh.
So
What's
let's
the status?
just read that for the audience. It says the film survives in its 1934 re-release form, when it was converted from its original sound-on-disc technology to sound-on-film. To provide space for the soundtrack, the image was noticeably cropped on the left side, except for the opening credits sequence and the end titles, which were replaced and are centered. Some pre-code footage, about 3 minutes, were also deleted and is believed to be lost.
Wow, that's really sad.
So, yeah. So, I suppose that explains why it hasn't exactly been available.
Yeah, someone has got it. Someone's got it in a basement somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's locked in a vault. It exists. It has to.
Yeah. Maybe we'll see it one day.
I hope.
Yes, then we'll all just alert each other that, oh my god, Disraeli is available. I don't know. Let's move on.
Yeah.
This is from Jackson DeStefano. He says, hi, yes, I was wondering what your thoughts are on this George Arliss fan blog. And he linked to something called arlissarchives.com.
Huh.
I found it a few months ago, and it makes me bonkers every time I remember that there is an active fan blog for George Arliss.
That's amazing.
Yes, so I clicked on the link here, and it's fully an active blog about George Arliss, and just kind of like has posts that are just a picture of George Arliss, and it says Happy New Year.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. I suggest all my listeners check it out and give it some traffic.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go look that up later.
Yeah, like I said, fully active blog.
I love people's dedication to stuff like that. It's so weird and just delightful.
Yeah. There's just a lot of posts here. I like that there's a kind of like a sub category here that just says Arliss alert, which is every time a George Arliss movie is on TCM. This is kind of sweet in a way.
Yeah.
So,
well, maybe
yeah.
I'll have to follow them, so next time Disraeli is on TV, I'll know.
Yes, exactly. And this post says a 152nd birthday greeting to George Arliss.
Aww. I want to know that person. I bet they're cool.
I know. Yeah. All right. Well, moving on. Let's talk about The Divorcee. Ooh, scandalous. Ooh. All right. So Norma Shearer is our Best Actress winner of the year. She's playing the titular divorcee. And she has a relationship with a man who ends up cheating on her, and then she seems to have her own affair, which is sort of hinted at but we don't really see it very much. And they get a divorce, and there's another man who always secretly loved Norma Shearer who wants to get with her now, and she has to decide what she wants. I think, well, let me just get your thoughts on Norma Shearer first. Do you have a take on Norma Shearer? Because I find that from what I've seen, she's a bit divisive as an actress.
I like her. I get the divisiveness, but I like her generally. I think she has this something, that early
The X
Hollywood.
Factor.
Yeah, I think she has it. I like her a lot.
I think she's pretty good here. I don't know if it's like quite a best actress worthy performance that she's giving.
I would say no.
Okay, yeah. I'm just trying to be nice here.
Yeah.
I mean, she does get a few scenes where she gets to showcase some of her range and all the emotions she's feeling with all the men in her life, but I can't say I walked away from this being like, wow, Norma Shearer, give her that trophy. I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit also with the Love Parade too, but the end of the film, it sort of has her kind of forgiving her ex-husband, and they all just reunite and potentially get back together. It has a bit of an old-fashioned feel to it, and sometimes things like that can be a bit distracting, but I have to remember context of this was 1930. Either way, what do you think of the film?
I enjoy it. I think that it's I can't say that it's a fun movie because it's like I don't know. There's something about it that it's weird that it's a Best Picture nominee. Given some of the other films that came out that year, it just seems like an interesting choice, but I'm wondering if part of it is just the caliber of stars that were in it that kind of propelled it to the Best Picture lineup. But I think that it's an interesting story because it definitely is one that looks at the consequences of choices, even when it's a choice that you want to make, and even when you think that you're happy or you are happy for a while, every choice that we make has some sort of consequence to it. And this does explore that a little bit, and like you had mentioned, then there's this other guy that has been in love with her, but he ended up making a choice somewhere along the way out of guilt, and he got married to someone that he had disfigured in an accident. And so it's like everybody is dealing with something, and the circumstances that bring them back together are through other choices that they've made that are not good ones. So I don't know. I think that as a display of that, as a sort of just a storytelling device, I think that it works, and it's kind of entertaining. It's also kind of, sad in certain ways because of looking at the way certain people have kind of not ruined their lives, but sort of derailed their own happiness because of things that they've done. I don't know. I think it's an interesting take. And I think that, I think Norma Shearer was better in other films around that time, including another one from that year. But yeah, I like it.
Yeah. It's decent. I think it's just one of those, like, I always find when I'm looking at 5 nominees of Best Picture years, there's always one that's just like right in the middle for me, and that's The Divorcee.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not bad by any means, but it's also not like super outstanding. So it's just kind of there for me. But I do want to acknowledge that this is also a film that is about a woman who is making her own choices, and doing things that we wouldn't really see as much once the code was enforced more. And I know that Norma Shearer has expressed that she was kind of disappointed with how she couldn't play roles like this after a certain point, which I understand.
Yeah, female autonomy really went by the wayside once men got to make so many decisions about the movies that were being made. And it's interesting because it's I don't know, the Hollywood the production code really set back women's rights and the movement toward equality by decades. And it's interesting how just something as simple as a woman not getting to, go and have an affair with a man on screen could have that kind of power, but it did. They started just really showing women as a certain, proper women don't do these things, and we can't show that. And it had a long lasting impact.
Yeah, it's sad, and the
It's
National Legion of Decency is a big thing at this time,
hmm
really
yeah.
cracking down. You know,
It's also really interesting because I think that the without like before people really knew, like going back into film history, me studying film history, before I really understood the production code, where it got started, what it did, what the impact was, and why it happened in the first place. I think a lot of us just kind of had this idea that in general, like we believed what we saw on screen as just kind of a representation of what people were really like off screen, and had sort of this Puritan view of life before the 60s as being like everyone was proper, people didn't sleep around, that kind of thing. And it's like you see this movie from 1930 and you're like, oh, wow, this is not at all what I thought life was like back then.
right? And like especially that opening scene where they're all just kind of like hanging out and having fun and
Yeah.
partying and just kind of being all over each other
Drunk
and
driving.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. So just goes to show you, don't believe everything you see in the movies.
Exactly.
um, we got quite a few questions about the divorcee. I'm not sure what spurred on this question, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. Mark Lamb said, would a divorcee remake be PG, PG 13, or R?
If they did a true remake and stuck to the nature of this story, I think it probably would be at most a PG-13, really, because I think that this particular movie isn't about showing what they're doing, showing the infidelity and all that. I think it's really just more about the emotions and the relationships.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
in the time that we live in, I don't know that a filmmaker would tell that story, and it probably would end up being made as an R-rated movie.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of high emotions in this, so there'd probably be more swearing, you know?
Sure, but I just mean like I think that if they were gonna make it now, they would probably want to make it steamy and
Right,
sexy
that's true.
and which I think would be a disservice to the story at the center of it.
I would agree. Yeah. Let's say PG 13.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Catherine Short said, you have now discussed all of Norma Shearer's nominated performances. Can you discuss why she only won a single Academy Award despite her enormous popularity and the studio support she had behind her? Do you think she ever came close to winning a second?
Mm.
Okay. So I will just say, like, she has 6 nominations,
Yep.
and she retired in 1942, which is a very good record for any actress. So I will say that I don't think she was, like, under rewarded by any means. So
Yeah, 6 nominations in 12 years is that's pretty great
yeah,
stats.
yeah. Most actresses would be very lucky to get that kind of a record. Anyone really. And so I would say that she came closest because I can actually confirm that she was second in one of these years because of Academy records, that she was in second place for the Barretts of Wimpole Street.
Yeah.
So there you go. Maybe she came close for Marie Antoinette because that's obviously an iconic character, and I don't know, seems like the kind of role that the Academy would be taken with, but I would say she was honored well enough.
Yeah,
Some would say more so than she needed to be.
yeah. The question is interesting. It's fun to talk about those kinds of things, but it also suggests, and I'm not saying that the person that asked it is saying this, but when we ask these types of questions, like, "Wow, why hasn't Glenn Close won an Oscar?" Um,
Mm,
it also it now it's like, yeah, we want to make it about that person and they should have won or they should have won more. But I think it also kind of um, overlooks the people that did win, who they lost to sometimes. And Glenn Close for the wife, yeah, that's a great performance, but can anybody really fault Olivia Colman for beating her that year? No. That's an
Right.
amazing performance too. And if you look at all of the times that Norma Shearer was nominated and didn't win, it's like, well, but if you look at Claudette Colbert and it happened one night, like how
Yeah.
does she not win, you know? So, yeah.
That is a very good point, and I think more people should take into account context
Mm-hmm.
of like you have to think about the competition and the particular years, and it's not just this the Academy and the way they hand out Oscars is not just like a lifetime achievement award necessarily,
Right.
where they just have to be like, oh, how did this one person never win? But you look at the particular years and it's like, well, maybe that's why they never won, because they were always against really tough competition, and that doesn't have to be a personal thing against them that they lost all those times.
Right. Like you think,
I know
wow,
that's
how did
ironic coming from me as a Glenn Close person, but
but
still.
it's true. Yeah, it's like, how did Peter O'Toole never win an Oscar? How did he not win for
Hmm.
Lawrence of Arabia? Oh, I see. Because
Gregory
of,
Peck.
yeah, exactly. Like, and it's
Yeah.
like, of course Gregory Peck won that, but also Peter O'Toole was great too. It's like, man, I would have hated to have to be an Oscar voter that year. Like,
Exactly.
that is a tough choice.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the thing. It's like there's always times where it's like, man, how did this person not get it? But when you really look at the competition, it becomes a little bit more clear. And I think it's the case with Norma Shearer too. And certainly, yeah, we know that one particular year she was in second place, and she might have been in second place every time that she didn't win. Who knows? She might have been very close, but it also, we can't negate the fact that the women that she lost to also were very deserving.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, it's like, I mean, yes, she has enormous popularity through a lot of this time, but she had an Oscar. She doesn't need another one. I mean, like, Julia Roberts has been popular for so many years, and she only has one Oscar, and I don't think it's like a personal thing against her that she hasn't won a second one.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
all right, let's move on to Steve K, who said most, if not all, of Norma Shearer's nominations have Irving Thalberg's involvement to some degree. While
Weird.
there's a clear Yes, while there's a clear bias because she's his wife, do you think Thalberg genuinely tried to cast other actresses in his movies, or he just gave every part to Norma Shearer? Take a guess. I don't know if that's like sarcastic, but um, yeah, it helped. I'll say that. I feel like there's a tendency sometimes to just be like, oh, she was married to the boss and therefore she has the career she had, when she was actually a very talented actress, I would say.
That's the thing. Like she had a career in her own right, and I think that her connection to Thalberg certainly helped her get certain roles, but I don't think it's the reason that she was a star. And I don't think that uh, every role she got was because of him. And I don't think that he only wanted to cast her in every movie that he was producing either. Um, I think they probably, and this is all conjecture because I don't know, but I feel like probably they did talk about some of these things. And I think that anything that she was either not interested in or not right for, she probably helped him pick other actresses to take those roles too. I think that she probably had a lot to do with certain casting decisions, but I don't think that it's fair to suggest that he's the only reason that she became the star that she became.
I agree, even though Joan Crawford would disagree.
Of course Joan Crawford
From
would
what I have
disagree.
read, she had some choice words for the reason why Norma Shearer was getting a lot of juicy parts,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yep.
or at least has been quoted as saying that. I don't want to say that it's been on tape that she said that.
Right.
So, you know. All right. Glenda Miss Jackson, if you nasty, said, did Norma win for the right performance? So I don't know if this means like because she also had a nomination this year for Their Own Desire, or just did she win for her career for the right performance? Either way, I haven't seen Their Own Desire, so I can't speak to this particular year. You have,
I
right?
have. Mm-hmm.
Do you have a
And
thought on that one?
I it's kind of weird. I like Their Own Desire as a film better, but I like her performance in The Divorcee better. It's kind of weird. Because I think that her character, I don't know, her characters in the two are not that dissimilar. Her story is very different, but I don't know. I think that it would have been. It's interesting that they were both nominated, but I don't. It makes sense to me that she would win for the performance that also was nominated for Best Picture.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, just speaking to her full nominations, she has The Divorcee, Their Own Desire, and then A Free Soul the very next year, and then The Barretts of Wimpole Street, Romeo and Juliet, and Marie Antoinette is her last. And I haven't seen Their Own Desire, and I have not seen Marie Antoinette, even though I feel like, again, that's one of her more noteworthy ones. I have seen the others here. Definitely not Romeo and Juliet because, quite frankly, she's too old for it.
Yeah.
I know that sounds like me being just like, I'm a man talking about how this actress is too old for a part, but she literally is too old to be playing a teenager. So
Yes,
that's just the
definitely.
reality. Barretts of Wimpole Street, I think, is good, and she is good in it, and she certainly carries that very well. But, like, I'm not going to take away Claudette Colbert's Oscar. So
Nope.
that's not happening. And A Free Soul, she's also very good in, but I'm not taking that away from Marie Dressler. So let's just say I'm fine with her winning for this.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't actually seen the rest of this competition, so I can't speak to, yes, she was the right winner of this category, but there you go.
Their Own Desire, by the way, was also written by Frances Marion.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
She is all over this. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Love it. Love it. One more question. So much about the divorcee. Wow. Okay. Marcel said, how gay is the divorcee in the divorcee compared to the divorcee in the gay divorcee? Say that 5 times fast.
I don't think I could.
So, the gay divorcee, of course, is a Ginger Rogers film, right?
Yeah.
And so, I would say she's a lot more gay than Norma Shearer, even though they're both pretty gay, and gay meaning happy.
Yes.
Unfortunately, not gay meaning gay.
Yeah, in the
'Cause it's-
Divorcee, she's really unhappy.
Right. So,
Which is kind of the point of the movie, so yeah.
but she's pretty gay in the beginning.
She is, definitely.
She's having fun.
She's definitely
know.
very gay in the beginning, but then it's just too much and she becomes very ungay.
And she gets bogged down in a straight love triangle.
Yeah, and it's not a very exciting one.
It's really not. Even though it does have Chester Morris.
True.
Also, Robert Montgomery's here.
Look at that.
Yeah. Yes. 2 films nominated for Best Picture.
And can I just tell you that it's funny because when I realized Robert Montgomery was in both movies, I had to look back at the pictures from both because I was just like, wait, that's the same guy? Because he looks very different from one to the other.
Yeah. That's acting.
Yep, it's true.
All right. Let's move on to our final Best Picture nominee. We have The Love Parade,
Which I did not get to see.
which is also very difficult to find. I was able to find it. I won't say where, but I was. So we've talked about Ernst Lubitsch, Maurice Chevalier, all their musical comedies before with 1 Hour with You, as well as The Smiling Lieutenant. But this was the first one, and it really broke through with the Academy in a big way, getting 6 nominations, which was a record at the time for a single film. You know, also beating All Quiet on the Western Front for that matter, but didn't win anything. This was the original like goose egg for a film. It's kind of fun. As far as the plot, it's about Maurice Chevalier as this military attaché who gets into trouble and meets the Queen, played by Jeanette MacDonald, and the two of them end up falling in love. There's some interesting gender dynamics, but this is noteworthy for being the first Hollywood musical to have songs that are woven into the narrative of the film. So, quite influential in that regard. But as far as like the dynamic, it's sort of interesting because he has to play the role of the supporting husband because she's the queen, so he can't really make a lot of decisions, and of course that ends up really frustrating him. But at a certain point, like I said earlier, they kind of revert to the classic gender norms thing in a way that does really date the film. But for what it's worth, it's still a good time if you don't really think about it too much. The songs are quite good, especially the ones from Lillian Roth and Lupino Lane, who are basically playing like the attendants of the two of them. They're both very goofy, a lot of fun. This is not a movie that leaves a lasting impact overall, you know, just like how I felt with the other Lubitsch movies I talked about, but it's kind of a nice winky wink to the camera kind of entertainment that I can see why, you know, an Academy would be just sort of charmed by it, I suppose.
Yeah.
So
I'll have to take
yeah.
your word for it. So I have not gotten
Yeah.
to see it. That's another one I'll
It's
be
okay.
on the lookout for.
Yes. This is from Chels, who said The Love Parade got the most nominations but 0 wins. Would you have awarded it anything? Well, let's take a look at its categories. Best Picture, definitely not. Best Director, definitely not. Art Direction, okay, no, probably not. No, not with that category, because there's also Bulldog Drummond, which I think is very good in that regard. Cinematography, no. The best sound recording, not with the Big House in that category. Is that it? Is there acting? Yes, Maurice Chevalier, one of his nominations is for The Love Parade, and I haven't seen Disraeli, as we've noted, but I don't think that Maurice Chevalier should have won an Oscar for The Love Parade, especially with Wallace Beery also in that category. So the answer is no, and I'm glad that it walked away with nothing.
But do you think that it deserved 6 nominations?
No. I don't think it should have been nominated for Best Picture or Director or Actor. I'll give it sound. There certainly are some sounds. And it's very pretty, you know, art direction. Give it art direction and sound recording and end it at that.
There you go. All right.
That's what I'll say.
Okay.
Catherine Short said, you have covered quite a few Ernst Lubitsch films at this point, so I was wondering what your favorite of his nominated films is and whether you think he deserves to be considered one of the greatest directors of all time. Do you have any feelings one way or the other about Ernst Lubitsch?
Oh, gosh. Off the top of my head, no. Let me think.
I certainly am a fan of Ninotchka, which is the Greta Garbo film.
Yeah, that one's good.
And I like Heaven Can Wait. I have not seen The Shop Around the Corner, even though a lot of people love that movie.
I love that movie.
Yes. So
I'm trying. Well, that's the thing. Like, I'm looking at his filmography because I'm like, how many of his movies have I even actually seen? It's not very many. And of course, he had a very long career in silence first. But yeah, like the movies of his that I have seen, I enjoy a lot. But he's not a name that comes to mind as greatest living director, or not living, but one of the greatest directors ever. You know, part of it is because of the fact that like I don't attach his name to his films. You know, like when I think about The Shop Around the Corner, I don't think, oh, that's a Lubitsch film. I think, oh, that's a really cute, you know, rom-com movie. I think of Jimmy Stewart, before I think of
Right.
him. So, yeah.
I will just have to see more in general because I've only seen a handful, like 5 or 6. So I
Hmm.
can't really speak to like him being one of the greatest of all time. But
Yeah.
I am sort of in the same boat as you, as being like, I don't really attach his name much to any of these films. I mean, there certainly is similarities with just kind of the put on a show entertainment sort of whimsy factor to some of these Chevalier movies, but I need to see way more before I can make any call on that.
Yeah.
So there you go. All right. Those were the Best Picture nominees. So let's move on to our Should Have Been a Contender segment. These are any other films from these 2 years that were eligible within the time frame of this that we just wanted to highlight that maybe should have been more of an Oscar contender. So, Karen, do you have any from this year you want to highlight?
Well, this is where I get to bring out one of my very favorite pieces of trivia about the Oscars, which is that the movie Sarah and Son, which was directed by Dorothy Arzner, was the first film directed by a woman to be nominated for any Academy Award. It was nominated for Best Actress for Ruth Chatterton. And I recently got to see a not very great, it hasn't been restored. So the copy that was sent to me um, is, it's really rough. It's very difficult to hear in certain places. And I think that probably affected my ability to really enjoy the movie. But it's an interesting story, and I really love Ruth Chatterton's performance in it. I don't know that I would say that I would have nominated it for Best Picture, but it's a fun movie to talk about, and it just gave me a good excuse to bring out my Dorothy Arzner first female director Oscar nomination trivia. So there you go.
Yeah, that's very cool. And it also sort of connects to your past episodes because you've talked about the piano, you talked about Little Miss Sunshine, which had Valerie Ferris as a co-director.
Hmm.
So
I
there you
like
go.
female
A nice.
directors, and I don't feel bad about that.
Nor should you. Nor
Thanks.
should anyone make you feel bad about that. I would be concerned if they did.
Yeah.
Um,
By the way, it didn't happen again until the 50s.
that is very upsetting and
Mhm.
sadly not surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say just, I mean, I recently read Alicia Malone's book on female directors of just going all the way back to like Alice Guy all the way
Mhm.
through the current day. And there's just like a huge time jump from like this time period to like, okay, yes, Ida Lupino, but then like pretty much no one else.
Yeah.
And it's just really quite upsetting.
Yeah. Well, and it's frustrating because the women existed. They were working. It became harder and harder to find them. And we were actually talking about this on Citizen Dame actually this week when we recorded our most recent episode. But it's like after the um uh maybe I was talking about this with you. Now I can't remember. It's been a weird day. Um but yeah, it's like just women were so entrenched in Hollywood, and they were so part of it, and then it was like at a certain point they just kind of disappeared. And it's very frustrating to look at that and to see how they were the pioneers of early cinema, and they don't get that credit. Their names have kind of been erased from that history, and then they were kind of cut out of the industry for a long time. And that those myths are still perpetuated today. Like a certain big old Hollywood Netflix movie that is getting a lot of attention this year includes a lot of scenes that take place on the MGM lot. So much of that movie is set in the 30s, and it's like you don't see the female writers in the writers room, and it's like, but they were there. Frances Marion would have been there. Herman Mankiewicz would have known Frances Marion. Where is she?
Yeah.
And it's that kind of thing just frustrates me.
Yes, very much so. I mean, I will just say in general to the female director discussion. I do think that the advent of the Academy Awards and this as an institution, I feel like part of it is intrinsically linked to the way Hollywood reshaped itself and ended up screwing over a lot of female creatives.
Yeah, that's been my argument for years, is that as soon as men in Hollywood figured out that they could create studios and make money and give themselves awards, they relegated women to the back. And it's been that way for 90 plus years.
Yeah, it's one of those things I hadn't really studied enough to actually make that connection before, but has been a very unpleasant discovery upon doing this show and covering the Oscars, is just how infrequently I'm talking about female creatives. So,
yep. It's especially frustrating knowing that they were there. That's the thing. It's not like the women just didn't exist and weren't interested in making movies. They were there and they were being ignored. Thank you for letting me say that.
Yes, of course, always. Not to do like a hard pivot, but I want to talk about I want to talk about a fun little movie called Bulldog Drummond. So
I have not seen that
this is a nominee for Best Actor for Ronald Colman, one of my faves of this era. It also gets in for Best Art Direction, and this is one of many Bulldog Drummond movies that would come out before this and for many decades after this. A very popular character about a war veteran who is just looking to get into some adventures. And he's back home. It's not like, war, like international adventures. It's like just like dumb little things he can do at home because he's bored. So essentially we have him playing just a very charming type of man, and he gets involved with this woman whose uncle is dealing with these other people who want to cheat him out of his fortune. Lots of fun little twists and turns along the way. I don't know if the other actors are quite as good as Ronald Colman by any means, but I suppose that I would sort of put this in the same general box of something like Sherlock Holmes or even like Pirates of the Caribbean, where it's just a very fun adventure with a charismatic leading man, and I just found it enjoyable. I think it probably got the nominations that it deserved, and that was probably enough, but I did want to just highlight it because it's a very fun film.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do you have another one?
So I'm going to say I haven't seen a lot of movies from 1929, 1930, partly because they're difficult to come by. And when you can find some, it's hard to know if they're the ones you should watch or not.
Yeah.
I did catch the movie Wise Girls, which it was not nominated for anything, and I think there's a good reason for that, and I'm not necessarily advocating for it, but it is kind of a fun movie. It's weird because when I first was watching it, I thought it was supposed to be more of a drama, and then I realized, no, this is all just supposed to be really funny. And once you kind of settle into the humor of it, then it's like, yeah, this is a pretty funny movie. So it's basically about there's this dad, and he's got 3 daughters who genetically could not possibly be related, but also one of them is like 20 years older than her sisters. It's weird. But like the casting is odd. It's adapted from a play, and you really feel that because it takes place all in one location, like one room of this house, and people are just kind of coming and going into this room. So there's no real sense of movement at all, which some directors can make that work really well. Others cannot, and it just didn't really work for this one. But it's just kind of this funny, silly story where the middle daughter, she's in love with this man and he's in love with her, but he has all these expectations that she's just going to be this proper housewife, and she's like, no, I want to be an actress, and this director told me I could, so I'm gonna. And so he doesn't support her, so she decides to just run off and marry this guy who just happens to be a plumber at their house one day. She doesn't even know him, just like makes him marry her. But he has fallen in love with her younger sister. It's like this chaotic, crazy story, but it's funny. It's not a great movie, but it's just a lot of fun, and I think it really captures sort of this whimsical feeling that we associate with a lot of movies from the time period.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk about a very interesting film from this year called Hallelujah. I don't know how much I would say that it deserved more Oscar nominations. It just gets a Best Director nomination for King Vidor. But I did want to discuss it because it's a very unique film to come out in this year. It's a musical that predominantly stars black actors. And according to King Vidor, he said that he wanted to explore black life in the South in a non-stereotypical way. And the story, it's about a farm worker who ends up being tempted by a woman and ends up killing this woman's boyfriend. And then he runs away and he becomes a minister, but eventually this woman comes back into his life. Conflict ensues. Like I said, certainly one of the more interesting films you can watch from this year. I do think that if King Vidor was looking to present a non-stereotypical view of black people, it's not entirely successful. There's something just a little insidious about showing this main character as giving into some very animalistic impulses. And there's kind of a stereotype with the woman played by Nina Mae McKinney as just a harlot, and she's kind of exoticized in a way that isn't great. But it's still very interesting to watch, just to see Hollywood treating black characters in lead roles how they think they should be treated, even if it's not something that holds up today as much. So one of those films that one of those films that should come with like a warning before it, I suppose.
Yeah, that's been sitting in my library on Criterion for a while. I haven't hit play on it yet, so
yeah, it's an interesting one because it does, in a way, it does sort of explore something you wouldn't see in most movies for even many decades after that. We wouldn't see just like black characters hanging out and having families and sort of celebrating and being with each other. That just wouldn't be seen as much in the mainstream. So I guess it's noteworthy for that, I would say. We got this from Mark Lamb, who said, "Do you think Nina Mae McKinney deserved a Best Actress nomination, but she was not even considered because of her race?" I think that probably had something to do with it. Yes, sadly. But I think she's doing what she can with a role that is very cartoonish. So I don't know if I would fully say she deserved a nomination, but I do know that from what I understand and what I've read, that was kind of like a sort of a groundbreaking character in the fact that just there were a lot of the fallen woman who turns to prostitution sort of thing.
Yeah,
would be something that we would see quite often. So didn't get any other questions there. So did you have any others you wanted to talk about?
I'm trying to think. I mean, we've already talked a little bit about Their Own Desire, and I think that
Right.
yeah, and like I said, I think Norma Shearer was good. I wouldn't necessarily nominate that for anything. I'm trying to think. Yeah, this is such a weird year because, like, first of all, like I said, I haven't seen enough films to say, like, oh, this should have been in instead of that. And I haven't even seen all the Best Picture nominees from that year. So it's hard to really give a good answer to that. But I definitely think that this is exactly the case for why films need to be preserved, because I think a lot of these are just not even available anymore.
Yep, I know. It's really too bad. Um, I just want to mention Anna Christie here, because this was the film advertised as Garbo Talks.
Oh yeah.
Um, so this was Greta Garbo's first film that people heard her voice.
Mm-hmm.
It was her first big sound film, and she has so much screen presence in this, and she has such a incredible sultry voice that I guess you could see why she would continue to be a star through this era. And she gets an Oscar nomination for it. And she's playing a woman who is reuniting with her father, and he kind of cast her away at an early age. And here she is back into his life, and she gets into a romance with someone, and she's just having to deal with a lot of not so great men in general. Another film that has some outdated gender politics, but worth it to see her. And also Marie Dressler here is playing a supporting part as just a woman who's hanging out at the local bar, and she just has this very long conversation with Greta Garbo at the beginning of the film where they're just talking about their lives. And you can tell very much that this is based on a play.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
I forgot I
both of those
had seen
actresses
this one. It's
are
been a
good.
while. It's been
Okay.
a couple of years, but I have seen
Mm-hmm.
seen that one, and yeah, Garbo, man.
Yep. Garbo, man, you know?
Great.
Yeah. And Marie Dressler also
Mm-hmm.
very good here.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we got this from Mark Lamb. Would Marie Dressler have won Best Supporting Actress for Anna Christie if the award existed? Probably.
Based on the things that I have seen from that year, I can't imagine who her competition would be, really. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, I don't think the actress from The Big House would have even been nominated.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of women in All Quiet on the Western Front. I mean, I'm just like, The Divorcee doesn't even really have another standout woman, I don't think.
Not another standout. There are a couple of options there, but none of them really have any sort of an arc.
Maybe Lillian Roth from The Love Parade, because she's very fun and scene steely. But I do think Marie Dressler, especially because she had really had such a presence and would become a big movie star after this, probably would have been her.
Yeah.
This is from Chelsea. Romance, Hallelujah, and Anna Christie made it into director but not picture. Would you swap any of them into the lineup? Well, can't really say, but maybe I would swap out Disraeli based on the reviews of people I know. And put in well, I haven't seen Romance, so I can't say that. No, I'll keep it as it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gabe Guarine said, how close were Hallelujah and Anna Christie to getting Best Picture nominations? Probably close, since they got in for director. But probably Anna Christie more so than Hallelujah.
Yeah,
That's all I have
especially
on
with
that.
the name recognition there with Garbo. And
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
It's weird though, because yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, well, the Academy was just different and it ran differently than it does now. And
That
so
is
it's
true.
like, just because something got in for director doesn't necessarily mean it was close for picture, but it probably still does mean that.
Yeah.
It's hard
At
to
least
say.
it was in the conversation for sure.
Yeah.
That is all I wanted to talk about. We just got a few other questions that are from things that we haven't discussed yet, but did you have any other films?
No, not really.
Okay,
I'm
well,
just looking through your list, and it's like, yeah, there's so many I have not seen.
Well, this was just from Mark Lamb, who said, despite Gloria Swanson's Oscar nomination, she was no longer a star as the 30s progressed. Why do you think she fell out of favor? So she's nominated for The Trespasser, and I believe at the first Academy Award, she was nominated for Sadie Thompson. So 2 Oscar nominations under her belt, and yet she doesn't really have the extensive career until Sunset Boulevard happens, of course.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that because I don't know enough about what was going on in her life in the 30s and 40s, but I do think that her sort of absence from the screen, or at least stepping back, made her performance in Sunset Boulevard all the more captivating and exciting.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
And I think that it was coming from a place of sort of really understanding and having sort of this disdain for Hollywood, but also wanting really badly to still be part of it.
Yes, a real honesty to that particular performance. Yes. I will say I have the Best Actress book that is all about all of the Best Actress winners, of course. And the chapter on Norma Shearer has an interesting ending to it because she retires in 1942, and the way it's described is that she kind of went into a quasi Norma Desmond existence after that.
Interesting.
Where she just became a recluse, but also just still very, like, obsessed with image. And I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting connection, and it would have been interesting to see her in Sunset Boulevard, see what she could have done with that.
Yeah.
Because I think she could... That would have been an interesting, especially even more interesting, because Norma Shearer was such a huge star for a big period of time, more so than Gloria Swanson, that would have made things even more interesting, perhaps. But still love Gloria Swanson in that role, and it's iconic, so I'm not taking that away from her.
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah. Well, and that's the thing is maybe Norma Shearer would have been too closely married to her own life, and it just wouldn't have worked. Who knows?
Too close for comfort, yes. But I did also read that she discovered Janet Leigh.
Well, we can thank her for that.
We can thank her for that, and we can thank her for Jamie Lee Curtis while we're at it. So there you go. I guess on that note, I'm pretty much done with talking about films of this year. Unless you had anything else you wanted to mention?
Nope, I think I'm good.
Okay. Well, when we come back, we will be delivering our verdict as to whether we think All Quiet on the Western Front deserved Best Picture or if The Big House should have taken it.
You, mother, you know how much you're needed? Ah, I see you look at your leader. And I, too, look to you, Paul Baumer. And I wonder what you are going to do.
I'll go.
I want to go. Me too.
I don't see that. The Kaiser's got everything he needs.
Well, he never had a war before. Every full-grown emperor needs one war to make him famous.
I'll tell you how it should all be done. Whenever there's a big war coming on, you should rope off a big field...
And sell tickets.
Yeah. And on the big day, you should take all the kings and their cabinets and their generals, put them in the center dressed in their underpants, and let them fight it out with clubs. The best country wins.
Never before, and perhaps never again, will the screen capture so completely, so profoundly, the emotional crises of men whose utter loneliness ate away their hearts, whose pathetic yearning for love drove them to distraction, whose sheer terror knew no bounds. This is the immortal screen achievement, which has become more dramatic, more vital with every passing year. See it again. See it with your heart wide open. For this is the motion picture about which it can truly be said, no man or woman can afford to miss it.
And we're back. So now we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think All Quiet on the Western Front deserved Best Picture or if The Big House should have taken it. Karen Peterson, what is your verdict?
I think that you hit it right on the head before. I think All Quiet on the Western Front definitely should have won Best Picture and Director, and The Big House should have won for writing, which is exactly what happened.
Well, there you go. And I very much agree with you there. I think All Quiet on the Western Front is the clear towering achievement of this particular year. And that's The Big House. I'm very happy that it was honored in some way, especially in a big category like for writing. But it just doesn't quite reach the heights and the enduring quality of All Quiet on the Western Front, which has continued to just haunt people for decades.
Yeah.
And wouldn't take that away. And I'm glad that, considering some of the films that I've talked about as Best Picture winners recently, like Cimarron, for example, I'm just glad that we had a movie like All Quiet on the Western Front that actually deserved its win, and you can't really argue with it, I suppose.
Yeah. And it's such an early, it's the third Best Picture, and it really did set this tone for these big, like you said, like these big epic films, and not just to win awards, but to be made. It really showed, like, put in some time, put in some effort, and tell these really big, grand stories. That didn't always work out for the best, but we've gotten some really amazing cinema as a result.
Yeah, so there you go. Good job, Academy. You did it right this time.
Well, they do sometimes.
Yes. Karen, thank you so much for being on this one last episode, at least of this series of A the Runner-Up Is. I really appreciate your commentary going all the way back to then, all the way through till now. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. And thank you so much for everything you've done. This podcast is really something special, and I'm glad that we have it in our lives forever.
Yeah. I'm so glad we had this time together. And where can people find more from you on the internet if they aren't already following you after all of those other episodes somehow?
Well, the easiest way to find me is on Twitter and Instagram at Karen M. Peterson. And there I link my work at We Live Entertainment and at Citizen Dame and The Watch and Talk.
Very good. And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you are a patron, thank you so much for being a patron. But if not, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup_is, where you can hear all kinds of bonus episodes with Karen and many other people. We have a lot of fun over there. And with that, thank you so much again, Karen.
Thank you.
And I will bid you all adieu.